started. Michael and I asked Elizabeth Jenkins, who's the planner for the town of Barnstable, to come in to do a presentation on what kind of revitalization effort they've put forward in the village of Hyannis, and kind of walk us through the town's thinking and planning and where they're at now and what kind of results they've seen in a very short period of time. Elizabeth, this is our Economic Development Committee. Welcome, thank you. We are a new committee, newly formed. The town invested in a strategic plan, an economic development plan. We are convened to implement that plan, and right now we're still in kind of our learning stages, trying to understand the plan, understand what surrounding towns have done, and understand what kind of tools we can implement. So we're excited you're here to walk us through what you guys did in Hyannis and see if there's anything that maybe we can transfer here to Orleans.
That's great. Thank you so much for the invitation, Elisa. It's such a pleasure to be here this morning. I am Elizabeth Jenkins, Director of Planning and Development, and it's so nice to hear that Orleans is thinking about approaching downtown in this broader economic development context. And I'm so glad that you're talking about housing as part of this, because we've certainly found in Hyannis and in communities across the country that there is no better way to revitalize main streets and downtowns than encouraging people to live there year-round. So again, I have just a brief presentation that I'd love to share with you to talk about, again, our approach and primarily how we've used zoning changes, notably a form-based code techniques, in order to produce, I think, the kind of results that we were looking for in Hyannis. So I'm going to share my screen. Everybody see that okay?
Good. Thank you.
Good, great. All right. And again, thank you so much for letting me join via Zoom. We're all busy day today, but always happy to come out there and meet you guys in person as well as time allows. So again, town of Barnstable, I just think it's important to give this context because we are fairly unique on Cape Cod. We're the geographic center of the Cape. We're the largest town. We're a 60-square-mile town. We are a regional transportation hub. We host the Cape Cod Regional Transit Authority Center, as well as ferries to Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. We are a Massachusetts gateway city, designated so by our demographics and our population. And the town of Barnstable has a very long commitment to investing in infrastructure. We do a $54 million capital plan annually, and we've had wastewater in downtown Hyannis since the 1920s. So we are a community that's committed to economic development through infrastructure. We also have a manager council form of government. We're one of only 13 communities across the Commonwealth that have this unique form of government. We do not have town meeting. Again, but a manager council form of government. So that's us in the broader context of the Cape, but within the town of Barnstable itself, we are also a very diverse community. We are made up of 7 different villages, each with their own histories, their own character, their own identities. When we talk about planning in Barnstable, we certainly talk about planning for the whole of the community, but it's also really important to understand the identity of each one of these villages, their historic village centers and main streets as well. The efforts that I'm here to talk about today focus largely on Hyannis, and not just Hyannis specifically, but really our growth incentive zone. The other thing that's, I think, important to realize about the town of Barnstable and downtown contextually is the revitalization work that we have been doing on Main Street Hyannis, on downtown Hyannis, happens within the context of a much larger town-wide land use policy, really to think about preserving the sensitive resources and historic areas that are in our western villages and directing new growth and investment to the underutilized areas in downtown Hyannis that are already served by adequate public infrastructure and that are looking for that reinvestment. So the town of Barnstable has had this, smart growth strategy in place since 2005, which again includes really a commitment to preservation and resource protection in many of our villages, as well as a comprehensive economic and revitalization strategy in what we refer to as the Downtown Hyannis Growth Incentive Zone. Again, the context being to direct new investment into our growth incentive zone away from areas with natural resource value. But at the same time, it's not about just growth and development. It's not about just building. It's about an established long-term plan with revitalization goals that are informed by our community, for the whole of our community. And the town has shown, a long-term, sustained and iterative commitment to planning within our growth incentive zone. And the primary incentive has been, in order to encourage that growth in Hyannis, of course, the availability of infrastructure, but also permit streamlining. A growth incentive zone is a tool that we have through the Cape Cod Commission that allows development to be exempt from commission review. So this permit streamlining has been an extremely powerful tool in terms of both being able to maintain local control over the type of development that we want to see downtown, and sending a message that this is where development in the larger context of the town of Barnstable is appropriate. So again, we have this larger housing and economic development strategy. What we have been focused on for the past several years is really looking at how we can create a regulatory environment that sets the table for private investment, and really doing that through thinking about, again, revitalization through housing. Hyannis Main Street has a very classic story in terms of the disinvestment of downtowns that we see across this country. It was thriving and pedestrian oriented, and then with the rise of the automobile, with the rise of enclosed malls, a lot of that energy went out to Cape Cod Mall area, Route 132, and the town, in the thinking at the time, actually took the ability to build new housing away from downtown Hyannis, thinking that they were going to give the edge to those commercial businesses, not thinking about the context of creating an authentic, livable place that really can serve a year-round community. But again, this revitalization strategy happens both in investment in our infrastructure and our public spaces. We know as we talk about more people living downtown, we have to think about congestion management. We have to think about creating beautiful green spaces for people to be able to recreate. So we have a number of really exciting projects that are happening in that arena as well. And also thinking about, as we support this economic foundation, how do we support our local business and those emerging economic sectors? It can't be just about jobs. Jobs and housing are two sides of the coin. So how can we create that vibrant entrepreneurial environment that's been there historically on Main Street that really sets us apart, whether you're a traveler or somebody who's looking to establish a business. So when we talk about housing and promoting housing, it really was a three-part effort in downtown Hyannis. We started with planning. I'm a really firm believer in planning before zoning. You have to be able to listen to the community. You have to be able to know what we want in order to be able to craft a development regulation that will produce that. So we started with a process that we partnered with the Cape Cod Commission at. I can't remember if Orleans participated in this in a smaller way, but we started with this community resilience by design planning and outreach process. We proceeded to totally revamp all of our zoning in downtown Hyannis. And then we had some design guidelines in place. We have a local 40C historic district downtown. We needed to make sure that once we sort of knew what we wanted to build, that it had that character that was so important to our community. So we are currently completing an effort to unify our design and historic district guidelines and regulations. I understand that the Orleans already has a like an architectural review committee. I can't think of a better tool to regulate design downtown. So you guys have a really great structure in place in terms of dealing with that third piece. So the purpose of this whole process, again, was to promote mixed use and multifamily development in our downtown Hyannis area, and not just protect that historic and maritime character, but also think about how we could improve the fabric of downtown in a manner that's consistent with those historic development patterns. So we spent a long time actually thinking about what those patterns were. We've been to Hyannis lately. It's kind of messy. There are some parts of the urban environment that are really legible, really beautiful. This is a great example, our Puritan Cape Cod building. But other pieces, because of really the impacts of traditional zoning over time, have lost some of that character and form. So we wanted to think about not just preserving and protecting, but how do we reestablish some of that character in places where it maybe never was before. So again, we knew we wanted to add housing, but we wanted a framework. You can't just say we want housing. What does that look like? So we participated in this community resilience by design process that really thought about what do those missing middle housing types look like, and how do we get there? And we came up with a three-part strategy. One being to infill underutilized lots. We have a lot of sort of open spaces, parking, underutilized parking lots, missing teeth. Let's take those opportunities, especially where they interrupt that sort of visual beauty of downtown, and think about how we can encourage development in those spaces. So redeveloping underutilized property, maybe your hotels and your motels, your places where that are, again, disinvested in, not living up to their full potential, and could be invested in order to create year-round housing for our community. And third, retrofitting existing structures, sort of thinking about our strengths are what we have on the ground. We've been talking about promoting top-of-the-shop housing in downtown Hyannis for a long time. So really thinking about how we incentivize that. And also post-COVID, we saw a very strong demand to convert underutilized buildings, particularly office space, into housing. But these projects were not happening under zoning. They weren't being realized under zoning. So that was a huge red flag. We knew we needed to adjust our zoning to be able to get the type of projects that we want. And this is what we ended up with after what was about a 4-year process, interrupted by COVID, I will say, but that involved extensive community engagement. We adopted to, I would say, form-based districts. I'll call them form-based light districts. I'm happy to talk about sort of the spectrum of form-based zoning and how you can get to a very specific regulated plan, or you could sort of take the approach that we did, which is define the form you want on the lots, as well as 5 what we call hybrid zoning districts that incorporate some of these techniques, but also look a lot more like traditional zoning. And, I will say this was a collaborative effort. We did not do this on our own. These projects were entirely funded in all 3 parts by support by the Commonwealth, smart growth grants from the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs, actually. So we grant funded all of these projects and worked with a fantastic team at UTEAL and Dan Bartman, who does a lot with the Form-Based Code Institute and is a real I think, expert in the field of zoning. He does some work up and around the Boston area as well. So when we talk about zoning, we're all familiar with sort of the traditional standards and, what they produce, setbacks and parking requirements. But again, we knew that in downtown Hyannis, these were producing a very predictable and typically visual, unappealing result. So we wanted to sort of modernize our tool. I think about zoning as a tool and a technology, really, and something that needs to be continually revisited and updated as your community grows and progresses. And this is what we came up with, again, specifically for downtown Hyannis. If we were going to do this in another community or another village in the town of Barnstable, it would look nothing like this. But in the context of Hyannis Main Street, thinking again about what what the market could provide, the type of densities that we were trying to achieve, this is what we ended up with, was a very sort of visual code that looked at all the sort of form and elements of a building. As well as, pushing these buildings up to the street and putting the parking in the rear. And I'll walk through those elements really quickly. So again, our zoning, I think, in part accomplished 5 big things. The primary one, which was supporting increased housing production. We've talked a little bit about that very predictable form and enhanced character. Greening the urban environment, as we continue to identify as an urban place, we also want to make sure we're bringing in that sort of ecological tradition on Cape Cod, and staying a place that looks and feels very green. Emphasizing place over parking, and for Barnstable, it was a very big deal to have a user-friendly zoning ordinance. So again, these challenges to housing production, we knew they were there. One of the reasons the zoning project got started was, the planning board chair came to me. We were doing this process, this discretionary, we call them regulatory agreement process, where every individual project goes through really just a gauntlet of town board, committee, and commission approvals. Again, it's a good process, and it allows us a lot of flexibility, but it's a lengthy one, and it was turning away a lot of developers. And so some of them, the ones that sort of had the stomach to go through this, were bringing very good projects forward. And, the planning board chair came to me one day and he said, these are great projects coming forward. He says, why do they have to go through this extensive negotiated process? This is exactly the type of development that we want to see downtown. Shouldn't our zoning be allowing this without having to go through all of these permit processes? So that helps set in motion really planning board support for what became this challenge to housing production, the primary one of which was this ratio-based zoning metric. So bottom line, dwelling units per acre. It's how a lot of communities regulate housing. But again, when you think about, you're permitting 20 units per acre, that's great, but you might have an office building on a half an acre, that could easily accommodate 12 studio units, and have the parking to do so. But because of that dwelling units per acre metric, it's not giving those property owners the flexibility to be able to respond to the need. So one of the primary goals is we knew this dwelling units per acre wasn't working. And again, you can see here, this was crafted very specifically for Hyannis. We looked at what all our lot sizes were, and we knew, again, they were across the board. We have small residential lots. We have very large commercial lots. So thinking about, again, just this one dull metric, this dwelling units per acre or bedrooms per acre, was not really responding to the diversity of opportunity that existed downtown. So that's where we got to the form-based code. And we knew if we were going to sort of give up some of that opportunity for boards, committees, and commissions to weigh into this process, that we had to create something that gave us an incredible amount of predictability. So we engaged those boards and committees, particularly our planning board, and said, what do you want to see? And instead of negotiating it on the back end, let's think about how we can build that into our zoning. So these were some of the tools that we used in our form-based code: minimum and maximum front setbacks, both on the primary and secondary frontages. So again, those are pretty traditional, but also standards very specific to the building. And this what sort of makes it unique in zoning. So a tool that we call facade build out, this is particularly important when we think about an area like Hyannis Main Street, where you have that continuous unbroken line of buildings, which really enlivens that street. Gives it that amazing feel. So how much of a street facade has to be built out? by new construction or additional construction. Of course, the number of stories. Then we regulated the height of each one of those stories. We really wanted to replicate that very traditional form of having that first floor storefront space be more prominent. We regulate upper story height. And then because we were doing a fourth floor, and that was a big step for our community, we also wanted to make sure that we took tools to minimize the visual impact of that. So we required, if you were going to do that fourth story, to make sure that it was stepped back, which also gives a great opportunity for outdoor living and balcony space. So we were very thoughtful about that. But we didn't just stop at the building form itself. We also regulate building components, including gables and dormers with exact figures of how much they have to be built out. We regulate projections, including balconies and windows. And then most importantly, I think, is we regulate the relationship between the building and the street. So making sure that it's promoting that interaction between the public and the private realm. So we have a series of different frontage types, one of which must be applied in each one of the districts. And again, the idea being, let's create a very sort of informed and predictable environment that takes, and this is an example of Barnstable Road in Hyannis, which we significantly upzoned sort of our existing character, and think about how we can start to rearrange our urban form and create something that both supports housing, supports our workforce, and supports sort of a more, I guess, beautiful development pattern. Again, an example being on North Street. And obviously this development is not all going to happen at once. This is a very, very long-term build out. Just because you adopt the zoning doesn't mean that this is going to happen over time. So just thinking about what that long-term potential is. Again, greening the urban environment. We have a fantastic ecological landscape designer on hand. So we just let her loose on our landscape standards. Again, being very specific about what we wanted to see in all of our landscape buffers. We did address the parking issue. This was a big point of discussion. We all know that the more parking you require on a lot, the less affordable your resulting residential development is going to be. The more of that land value that you have to attribute to surface parking spaces, to cars, the less affordable the units become. And I will say, again, this is contextual. Barnstable, or downtown Hyannis, is one of the places on the Cape where we do have that heavily walkable environment. We do have access to transit. We see a lot of people starting to choose walking or biking over having multiple cars. So we went to one space per unit, residential unit. We also sort of made sure that we incorporated, as of right, what has become sort of a very traditional way to think about parking, which is sharing parking between different land uses downtown that have different peak hours. So, your retail peak is going to be different than your residential peak, making sure that we gave credit essentially for shared parking on a lot. And finally, all of this comes in very user-friendly zoning summary tables. You can have the best zoning ever, but if people cannot read and understand it, it is going to be a challenge. So it's all color-coded, it's all fully illustrated, and it's packaged in a way that sort of all the general standards up front, and then you can pull out your tables. So again, I talked a little bit about also our design and historic district guidelines. It sounds like you guys are actually ahead of Barnstable on this one. So I won't go over this, but we have, I think actually the planning board at its next meeting is set to have a joint meeting with our historic district commission. Again, these two groups working together to really set predictable standards, both for the benefit of the board and for the benefit of the developers who are coming in, to cut down on the length of that regulatory review process. let's just be really clear about what we expect going in. Let's do that work up front as our historic district commission, as our planning board. So we're not necessarily negotiating it on the back end, but we're putting the work into the zoning, into the design guidelines. So these have been revamped again by the team at UTL. Whoops, did I just lose my presentation?
No, we see
No,
it.
we got it.
Yeah, we
Will
can
you
still
see it?
see it.
Ah, I can see it.
Yeah, building considerations. We're on the
There
side.
we go,
Yeah.
building considerations. To look at, of course, your sort of traditional design guidelines, but also site plan and landscape design considerations for the property. Signage, we were actually just granted a second award through Massachusetts One Stop to take this even a step further. Again, to take signage, our Historic District Commission meets twice a month, mostly to deal with signage. Let's just do the work up front, tell people what we want, and then, cut down on the need for all of these small businesses that are coming in town to go to that meeting. So we're going to work really hard on that. All right. So how did it work? So we adopted, our town council adopted by a unanimous vote, after a unanimous recommendation from the planning board, our new downtown Hyannis zoning in February. So it went into effect 30 days later in March. We had been working on this, holding community meetings. So we had some great projects that were anticipating this. You've been to downtown Hyannis lately and come down through Yarmouth Road. You were greeted by the beautiful Cascade Motor Lodge. This has been a vacant motel for a long time. We've now fully permitted 95 units in a mixed-use building. We have an inclusionary ordinance, 10% affordable on this property. So very excited about really the revitalization potential for the entire east end of Hyannis that this project provides. If you drive a little further down Main Street, this is our gateway into our beautiful historic downtown. The TD Bank property, which TD Bank moved out maybe 5 years ago. It's been vacant ever since. And again, you can see this is a building that was built in the 70s, definitely not sort of respecting that traditional development pattern and urban form set way back from the street, not reflecting that historic pattern of development downtown. We now have fully permitted a project that was done by Wind Development. This is 124 units, which are heavily affordable. Even without the requirement, this would be more than 25% deed restricted affordable and about 75% workforce development. So this was a project that we were very proud of and again are very successful of. Very, very excited about the success for downtown Hyannis that this represents. Keep driving down the street. This has been a property that has been vacant. I've been with the town for almost 15 years since I've been there, and long before that, used to be one of the first grocery stores in downtown Hyannis. And now we have going through the permitting process, a mixed use development. This is 22 condominium units, as well as first floor retail space. So extremely excited to see that property start to move. And then finally, this is a property that was intended to be first an auto repair. It used to be a car dealership. It's on the west side of Hyannis. The town, sort of negotiated with property owners. It was going to be a car dealership. It was going to be an auto body shop. It was going to be a car wash. Again, we were able to work with this property owner and say those are just not the right uses to have on downtown. And he has it under purchase and sale. This project is still in the sort of preliminary stages of review through our administrative site plan review process. But it will be a condominium home ownership development, around 40 units of affordable home ownership housing in downtown Hyannis. So that is the type of result that we see. And I think, really the power of zoning, zone for what you want. And you're confident that it will respond to market demand. Projects will come. Projects will come, and we've developed a great sort of relationship with developers over time, so they know what we expect. They know what our process is going to look like, and in turn, they bring to the table high quality projects at the outset, which reduces their length of time in permitting significantly. And for a developer, that is an enormous incentive, knowing what that process and what that approval process is going to look like, how much time it's going to take. And again, I will say this project happens in the context of a couple of other slides, but in the interest of time, I'll skip over them. We're doing a very exciting project to make our Main Street two-way, from a one-way to a two-way conversion. We're doing an incredible project that looks at sort of our village green, which has always just been sort of a traditional sort of campus style open space. How do we create really a central park for our community with play spaces for new residents coming in. So this zoning and this housing, again, isn't happening alone. It's happening in the context of a larger investment in our downtown. So sorry, I think I
No, it's great.
Housing all day.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went a little over. At least
No, that's okay. That's okay. This will be a segment I'm sure other people will watch later. So thank you for going into so much detail. And I like the approach of looking at different villages, kind of like Orleans. We wouldn't do the same thing in East Orleans as South Orleans as our downtown village. Before I open it up to questions, I just want to ask two quickies. It's sewered, so that's why you don't have to have space for wastewater. Right? And did you guys talk about number of bedrooms instead of number of units?
So the original zoning that was adopted for downtown Hyannis in 2005 did talk about number of bedrooms, again, with the idea that we wanted to be thinking about capacity. But I will say the town of Barnstable is implementing a significant update to our comprehensive wastewater management plan. I mean, bottom line, there hasn't been an issue in terms of plant capacity downtown for a very, very long time. So we felt, and again, that units per acre, bedroom per acre metric, we had both in our zoning originally, and it just wasn't working. Right. Again, whether you have a large one bedroom or a smaller unit with two small bedrooms, to us, again, it's about the form. What's on the outside that you see coming in? Do you have enough parking? That's largely going to drive it. But people are making different choices about automobiles right now. Let's give them the option. And if a project feels that it needs more parking to be competitive in the market, we've seen that happening. We've seen we've seen essentially deals between property owners happening to help better utilize underutilized lots to provide additional parking when it's needed.
Yeah, we're doing the 40-unit home ownership that she showed, Housing Assistance Corporation. We're very excited about it. But it has completely changed the way we interact with the town, the way we interact with our architects, and just expedited the whole process. So it's definitely working from our perspective as well. It's really helping it be predictable and speed up the timeline. Does anybody have any questions or anything you want to add, Peter? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much, Elizabeth. That is really fascinating, and I think we'll need to spend a lot of time thinking about how it may apply to Orleans. In terms of infrastructure, what are you doing looking forward? And I'm thinking particularly if there does continue to be a move toward electric vehicles, is the town thinking of providing public charging stations? Do you incorporate that in your form-based approach to developers, that they would include charging stations?
So we've had electric vehicle charging stations in our public parking lots for years now, and we recently just received a grant to update that infrastructure. We had them put in, I would say, 5 or 7 years ago, so we recently just gave them all a refresh. We are currently looking at drafting an ordinance. We have a new environmental and sustainability coordinator in the town of Barnstable who did a lot of research on what other communities are doing around requiring electric vehicles. And yes, we are in the process of drafting up options. In terms of this, I would say there are sort of, there are sort of three ways to approach it. I mean, you can sort of mandate them. You can ignore it, which I don't think is the right way to go, or really where we're going is thinking about making sure that as we have these larger developments that are doing, sort of a full scale, redevelopment of a property, making sure that they at least are putting the infrastructure in the ground to allow for the build out of those electrical vehicle charging stations in the future, because doing it now as you're doing that construction is the most cost effective. So we've been able to just really through our administrative site plan process, put that on the table, and most developers have agreed to do that. I think they want to. It hasn't been a hard argument, so that's what we're doing now as we continue to think about regulating this through a regulatory approach.
Thank you.
John?
Yes, Elizabeth, great presentation and a lot for us really to think about. My question, I hope I say this right, is when you talk about form-based zoning, was this based upon a lot of what already existed and you say, we like this, let's keep doing this? Or how much of this was created because we don't like what we have and let's invent something new? Because, for example, in Orleans, I mean, we're not going to lift the town off the properties and create something new and relay out the town. I mean, something like that even in 20 years is not going to happen. But, you want to be able to evolve, a suburban, semi-urban structure over time. And I think when we talk about form, and I like the idea, and I think we all do, of form-based zoning, what was your form based on? Was it so much, again, existing versus we'd like to have this instead of what we currently have?
So I would say both in two parts. And we did actually working with the commission, sort of a neighborhood-based analysis of what those urban forms looked like. So what were the buildings, what buildings were on the ground, what were their existing setbacks, where, in what areas did we have, sort of a predominance of parking in front of buildings in that typical suburban style. And in that in that core district, that purple district, it really makes up two roads, Main Street and Barnstable Road, which are incredibly different. Main Street has, again, that very intact historic development pattern. And so when we thought about writing the zoning for that, it was really about reinforcing that pattern. Again, when we looked at how we dealt with what was existing and pre-existing, making sure that anything new that was going to happen, again, built and reinforced on that traditional development pattern. Barnstable Road, very, very different. Very sort of auto-oriented, suburban style, a mix of office buildings, largely set back from the street, much more sort of full redevelopment opportunity there than the infill top of the shop. That was really about thinking about how do we see that sort of more drastic evolution over time, but still saying, hey, we as that evolution happens, we would like to have it happen in the form of that more traditional pattern that we see on Main, because we know that that's what encourages walkability. We know that that is the type of development that ends up being, I think, most, in a lot of ways attractive and marketing to people, attractive and have the ability to market to people. So it was both things, it was, again, those three strategies. For Main Street, it's, top of the shop, reutilizing existing buildings, filling in the missing teeth. On Barnstable Road, it's more that sort of thinking about how do we redevelop underutilized properties. It's the same zoning for both streets. It's just designed to promote both of those approaches.
Great, thank you, appreciate it.
Anybody else? Michael?
I just have one. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. That was a great presentation. Still a lot of information to process and a lot of good talking points moving forward for us to discuss. I guess my only, well, I've got a number of questions, but one that comes to mind that's on the top of the pile would be, have you found a number of developers have come in to participate in these various projects, or has it kind of been a small handful of people that have been kind of leading the charge?
I would say both. What's been really nice to see is that we have started to get sort of attention and investment from some of the bigger off-Cape builders. When the developer who did the project at the old TD Bank property, they're one of the largest developers and holders of affordable housing in New England. So that was not the type of developer that we were engaging with prior. So we have started to see some folks who are coming from off Cape, coming from over the bridge, sort of gotten word about what we're doing and, looking for, I think, really to be a part of what we're building. It's exciting to sort of get in up at the ground and on the beginning. So it's been a piece of that for the bigger projects, but what's been great also is that we also have sort of a core of what I call, small and local developers. I mean, they are our bread and butter, really. I mean, those are the folks, again, who were trying to get these projects done and continually getting frustrated by the zoning. It was really working with those developers, people that we know, people that serve on our boards, committees, and commissions, people that really understood the process, that were also sort of saying, hey, they were stepping up to this call for housing on the Cape. A lot of them came out of building and construction trades and started to get into development because they ran small businesses or their families did, and said, hey, we want to start thinking about how we can provide housing. So it's been great to be able to work with that sort of small team of core and local developers as well to bring projects forward.
So just following up a little bit on Michael's question, how did you get the owners moving? Was it just like, if you build it, they will come, change the zoning, and it will happen? Or were there other incentives or relationships or conversations happening?
Yeah, so I think a number of parts. I mean, I would say our community was very engaged in this process. People were watching what we were doing. We held multiple public meetings. We reached out to folks who we knew were in the housing sphere, who were in the preservation sphere. We engaged them all in that process. Again, the idea was really to do the work, do the engagement up front, so we could create a tool that had buy-in moving forward. So, that was a piece of it. I will say we do have another suite of tools that help incentivize. The biggest one by far is that permit streamlining tool, our growth incentive zone. That's the one that, again, really sends the message. But because we're a gateway city, we also have the ability to do some tax relief, on an increment housing development incentive program. We just did 3 at our last meeting with small local developers, all of them with, 2 of them with kids in our school district that, that I know well. And again, it's like an economic development TIF where you take that incremental value and you give relief on that incremental value. But it's hard to even and those were market rate projects. It's hard to make market rate projects work. Yeah. Our land values are high, our construction costs are high, our labor costs are high. So again, those sort of, naturally attainable housing projects we saw, especially with lending rates, the cost of borrowing going way up. We're having trouble getting off the ground. So we were able to use that tax incentive tool. And then we have an affordable housing trust as well, largely funded through Community Preservation Act funds that's able to fund projects on the affordable side as well.
Rosalind? Thanks, Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, thank you so much. This has been really, really wonderful to see this evolution and this, huge transformation that you're doing and planning for Hyannis. Do you think a lot of I'm going to say in air quotes, the ease of doing what you're doing is also because you're a gateway city and you've been able to get a little more funding and just a little more flexibility?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it definitely helps, right? We have a relationship with Mass Development. We have a relationship, we had a great relationship with the Karen, the prior administration.
The Baker Polito
and,
administration.
Thank you, Baker Polito. I was going to say the Karen Polito administration. That was
Karen.
that we had a great
It was all
relationship with
Karen.
the Baker Polito administration. Well, yeah, because Karen was on the ground a lot.
Yeah, she was, yeah.
There. She was engaging with us. She knew what we were doing. They were so good at listening to municipalities. That has definitely helped in terms of some of the bigger infrastructure grants. But, this is the first time we've gotten a MassWorks grant in 2017. And the last MassWorks grant that we did wasn't even for downtown. It was for, essentially a project that happened out in the regional commercial center. So, while I think it has happened in this round, it hasn't been pivotal. Does it give us some more tools? Yes, but I wouldn't say it was the game changer. All of the grants that we did, that we got for these projects, were grants that are open to everybody, not just gateway cities. They were through energy, they were through the environmental side of things, those smart growth zoning grants, which doesn't give any priority to gateway cities at all. So I would say it was a mix. Some of the tools, HDIP it's a great tool, but it's been a controversial tool too. I mean, it hasn't been an easy one. It doesn't promote affordable housing. As we see more of these market rate units come online, people are saying, hey, you really need to shift your focus now and focus more on that deeply restricted affordable. So, that's sort of where we're moving. But there's a lot of tools, especially now with the, with the new, some of the new legislation and the funding that are coming through the Healy administration. I think we'll find some of those additional resources and flexibility region-wide.
Yeah, we're working on a seasonal communities designation that mimics the gateway communities and advocating for zoning relief and funding programs much like are available. So we saw that discrepancy and have been trying to get it to the rural communities and advocating for that. So the governor's listening.
Absolutely. And I mean, as much as being a gateway city, we're a housing choice community. Yeah. And, that has allowed us to some access to additional funding and resources that have been helpful. So, and again, that's not tied to being a gateway city. That was tied to, best practices in terms of housing.
And we're a housing choice community as well. We're registered as one.
That's
great.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Steve.
Elizabeth, thanks very much. It was a great presentation. What role, if any, did the Cape Cod Commission play in your planning and your leading up to these projects? I know a lot of these were presented at the One Cape Summit, so were they involved early on with resources and things?
Yeah, I mean, that's the strength of the commission, right, is they have a really great ability to be able to provide that research and data analysis up front. So we did partner with them on the Community Resilience by Design, that original sort of visual preference survey. We did do sort of an analysis of all of the recent development that had happened and how it responded to our existing regulations together with the commission. It was funny how Resilience by Design happened. We were thinking about crafting a very, very similar process. And I was talking to the architects at Union Studios about it one day, just in the hallway. And they said, hey, we're doing almost that exact same projects with the commission. So we were able to sort of piggyback on work that was already happening in our region and not have to reinvent the wheel there. So yeah, they were incredibly helpful with some of that initial planning work that happened that really set the stage for the zoning that came later.
Thank you.
And we were one of those 5 projects that Union
thought you
Studios.
were,
Yeah, we were. So our downtown has already gone through that. In fact, it was a Governor Prince property that they used as their.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So
And again, that happened in Barnstable because Doug and I were chatting in the hallway. So
Yeah.
it's really about, again, making those connections and seeing where you can get things done most efficiently.
So I don't know, Michael or Alan or Nicholas, people who are in the audience listening intently, if anybody else has any questions or any of the,
I did.
anybody here? Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This has been great, as everyone has said. Just going to the parking piece, when it comes to mandates on parking, how did you start that conversation to get to a successful outcome to kind of lower what's mandated?
Yeah, so again, I think it was, again, very helpful as part of the housing choice effort at the state level to see that the Commonwealth really was pushing one space per unit as the standard for communities. So we were able to sort of take that experience that we saw in other communities, the research on the links between housing affordability and parking requirements, and sort of build in the argument that that again, we should have the parking, and it's a parking minimum. I will say you see a lot of communities, more urban communities across the country, going to a parking maximum, saying you can't have more parking than this. It's important to understand that, again, ours is a parking minimum. But we also know, again, it's, parking, when you think about a project, the number of parking spaces and the footprint of your building are largely what's going to dictate the density on a property. So in order to get those densities to a place where we knew we could encourage development to actually happen, to get these, really difficult underutilized sites to turn over, we knew we had to make some of those compromises. And again, I think it was also with the strength and the confidence of a parking study that we did in 2017, 2018 that said we have 14,000 parking spaces, surface parking spaces in downtown Hyannis. I do have to say there are a lot of people, as these projects that are going through are concerned about parking. I am not. What's happening is exactly what our parking study recommended, which is we see private property owners working together, making agreements so that existing surface parking lots that are underutilized are becoming better utilized. They're making private arrangements with each other. So we do see that happening. And again, we have an environment that does encourage walkability. We have we're trying to work with our RTA to make our seasonal shuttle become really more of a transportation option and not a tourist attraction. We're looking at micro-mobility solutions, bike share, and we see the scooters all the time now, and making sure that when we do our one-way to two-way conversion that we hope to get done over the next year and a half, that we have those protected on-street lanes that'll allow people to make that choice to bike or to walk in a way that feels safe and is encouraged downtown. So again, it's part of that sort of larger planning ecosystem, dealing with both transportation equity, I would call it, as well as housing affordability.
I see Michael Herman, he's the chair of our select board here, and Andrea has her hand up. I know they both have questions, but just real quick, when you say people are making other parking arrangements, that means that the property owner is leasing their parking spaces to the housing projects nearby. We're negotiating those kind of deals. So it's good for the property owners as well.
That's correct, exactly. It's making that full economic use of property. We've done a couple of projects. We've done a couple of agreements for smaller projects where we have, made lease arrangements for town-owned parking lots that are underutilized as well. Again, nobody's parking in those lots overnight. So if we can encourage a few workforce or especially deed restricted units with the benefit of those vacant public spaces, we've been able to do that as well. But on a limited basis, we know that our public is those spaces are going to continue to be more in demand as we continue to evolve. So we've tried to be thoughtful about that.
Thank you. Michael? You're on mute.
Hi, sorry about that.
Okay.
Thank you, Elisa, the committee, for hosting this, and Elizabeth for an excellent presentation, very informative. As I'm kind of listening through this, I was just wondering, Elizabeth, if you could touch on some of the kind of community buy-in, and were there concerns or lessons learned through the process that we could educate ourselves on?
Yes. I mean, so again, I think we worked to engage boards, committees, and commissions, people who really understood the regulations and the challenges as we went through this. We held multiple public meetings, and we were really thoughtful about how we did that. I mean, we know that sort of the zoning was a really big thing. And, you know, for a person who maybe doesn't understand the ins and outs of zoning, professional planner, and there's still some things I have to sort of slow down and think about in terms of zoning all the time. And so we really tried to think about how we communicated information and how we took, you know, not necessarily looking for just, you know, if we kept getting comments, for example, on open space and recreational spaces. And it wasn't, you know, in particular to any one line item, but it became really clear going through that that was something that our community was focused on as we went through this, which is part of why we ended up enhancing those landscape requirements. And that, so I think it was about definitely communication strategy with the public. We did a lot of frequently asked questions. You know, we were doing a lot of this during COVID, so we engaged in multiple ways. We engaged in person, you know, we engaged on Zoom. We had sort of open houses where you could come and, you know, virtual open houses where you could come and talk to a planner, you know, actual open houses where you could come, all sort of office hours where you could come and talk to a planner if you had questions. And the other thing is, you know, we were doing this with UTEAL, who are, you know, work on the private sector side as well. We put all this effort in. We wanted to make sure it would work from the perspective of, you know, the private sector as well. So I would definitely say thinking about, you know, doing that economic analysis of the zoning. We had by right mixed use zoning in downtown Hyannis for the last 10 years. We weren't producing any, you know, units. So it's really about thinking, you know, both unlocking the tool and the economic viability of the project as well. And so again, continuing to engage experts on the ground. We had a lot of one-on-one conversations with people, really to walk through particular concerns. Before this went to the council floor, it was a unique situation because we had councilors recused and it was, you know, very messy, but we sat down multiple times with members of the public, with councilors, and walked through the ordinance, you know, and really answered people's questions, and it made it a lot better. You know, I think people sort of thought that we were going to be, I guess, like upset or something about that, but we really welcomed that feedback, and we really ended up with a better ordinance at the end of the day because of all that process.
Thank you.
Thanks. Andrea?
Thanks, Elisa. Normally, as a liaison, I wouldn't ask questions, but Elizabeth, thank you for this presentation. I've been watching Hyannis for at least 10 years, and Orleans has all of, or most of the pieces that you've talked about. We have design guidelines. We have some of the, we have the resiliency by design information. My question is about leadership, and staffing internally. How big a planning department, or how did you get the infrastructure within government to take all the pieces and move forward, understanding that we have been preoccupied with accomplishing wastewater, and I feel like we're just about to make this happen if we can successfully staff and create the, as you said, the dialogue that uses input from each neighborhood or each step to inform the process. So we're doing this as a community and it works. Do you have any insight on staffing and process within town government?
Yeah, I mean, that's such an interesting story, and really one of the reasons why it took us 4 years to get this done, if I'm being honest. I mean, this started with the support of a town council, zoning, and regulatory committee that ended up getting, disbanded halfway through. It had the support of an economic development commission, which ended up getting disbanded, just because of the sort of political waves of what happened in local politics. And it happened in the context of COVID, where we were doing, we were working on the, on the transportation and sort of small business side of things in a way that we never expected that we were going to. If you went to Hyannis during any of the COVID years, we ended up laying down barriers in the middle of Main Street and turning half of it into a pedestrian walkway. That didn't happen easily. That took a ton of staff capacity, but this project really happened and really congealed over the past 2 years because of those exact two things, Andrea, because we had, consistent, strong staffing. We have four planners in the town of Barnstable, largely working in the planning field. So, support that could get all those day-to-day things done and work on these special projects was huge. And we had strong buy-in from our council leadership, who really brought people with concerns to the table and said, hey, you have a concern. What are your concerns? Can we talk this out? Can we get your vote? Because of the way that the recusals happened, we almost had to get a unanimous vote on this. So it was really, and we did not do that alone, nor would it be appropriate for us to do that alone on staff. It really was council leadership that went out and engaged those individuals, said, what are your concerns? It took us 4 hours to get this done at a council meeting because we had, I'm trying to remember the exact number. It was a big number. We had like 30 amendments to the zoning that we originally produced and we had to pass. And again, that was largely because of feedback. And almost all of those amendments passed. I would say maybe there were 2 that did not pass, but because again, I think we did the work and we found that consensus going into the process, not necessarily on the council floor. But we did it, in one night at council.
So we're getting close to, well, we're at 10 o'clock, but I want to just ask you one more question to kind of put this all in context for us, because we are the Economic Development Committee, so some people watching may wonder, like, why housing? So can you talk about, has the predicted economic impact or benefit to the small businesses or to the community that we should be considering housing as a piece of that?
Absolutely. I would say the biggest and strongest supporter of this zoning, even though it was housing focused throughout the whole process, were the members of our Hyannis Main Street Business Improvement District. They sat through all 4 hours of that zoning ordinance until it passed at 11 o'clock at night to show our town council that they had such strong support for this. They know that, having a environment where people are living on your street are good for business. Having more customers that are in walking distance of your neighborhood, having an urban environment that is invested in and beautiful is going to bring more people in as tourists. And we all know that, you have to be introduced and comfortable to a place before you're going to move there. A big part of our strategy, our tourism strategy, is convincing people that Hyannis is a great place to take a second look. And maybe, if you vacation here, you keep coming back, it's somewhere that you can, again, see that we do have this entrepreneurial environment. We do have support for our small business. We have things like a facade improvement program that are helping small businesses get started, and seeing that we do have that culture that sort of allows people to put down roots here. Obviously, the workforce issue as well. We all know that small businesses across all of Cape Cod are dealing with, workforce problems. So are we, as an employer, in order to get our firefighters and our planners and our teachers a big conversation every time we have those conversations. So when our school committee is having a conversation about housing, we know that it's a conversation not just about housing, but that sort of larger economic viability of the Cape. So it was amazing to have that support from small businesses going through this, and I think really critical, because those are, a lot of it is because people know that those are people who have been on the street in some cases for generations. Mm-hmm. And I think there was a matter of our community sort of trusting that if this was something that they supported, they knew that it was something that was good for our downtown.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks for coming this morning and putting so much time into a presentation and bringing us up to speed. It's really helpful for us, and Barnstable's lucky to have you. I know the Cape is lucky to have you. I love working with you, so I really appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time. A full hour. This was going to be like a 15-minute presentation. And
I'm so sorry. It's
No,
me.
we're
Get to know me,
grateful.
you know,
Yeah,
I
no,
just-
it's really-
I'm a housing and zoning brain.
Yeah, and it's just so important. It's core to what we're talking about and working on here. So it's really helpful to have your expertise and insight.
Thank you so much for having me. Again, I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, just juggling. Always happy to come back and talk more specifically about form-based zoning and the different ways it can look like. Again, ours was a light, but there's another way to do this that you actually create like a plan that's very, very specific about what you want to get built. So I mean, there's still like a lot of different tools in that toolbox. And again, always happy to come and talk more about that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Elisa. I'll
you
let you
later.
get back to the rest of your
Yeah.
meeting.
See you later. Thanks.
Bye.
So it is 10 after, or 5 after 10. So I think we'll just have a truncated agenda so we can move through. Is there anybody want to have any conversation, though, on Elizabeth's presentation before we move on? Or any follow-up from that? We can talk about it later if nobody does. Okay.
Well, Michael has it.
Oh, sorry, Michael. Hi.
Hi, as I said, of course, and I think we all thought excellent presentation. Is it possible to get this presentation, the deck or something? And I'd love to make sure we
Sure, I'll ask her.
let other people know and other committees to take a look at this. So
Yeah,
thank
good
you.
idea. I'll ask her. I'm sure she'd be willing to share it. Anybody, any other follow-up or concerns? Okay, so I think we'll just take, we'll just do the obligatory public comment, correspondence, and then approval of the minutes, and then we'll come back to the rest of the agenda. Is everybody okay with that? So is there any public comment? Anybody online for public comment?
No raised hands.
Okay, thank you. Correspondence, Michael?
None.
None, okay, great. And so we have, we're a hybrid meeting, so we have to do a roll call vote for the minutes. And so if anyone has reviewed them and can make a motion, that would be great.
I so move.
Okay, a
Second.
second, thank you. And so now, Peter. We have to do a roll call vote, so I have
I
to.
was absent for that, although I did watch it.
It's
Should I
up.
vote or not?
It's up to you. Technically for minutes, you don't have to be present, so it's up to you. If you want to abstain, you can abstain, or
I'll
you.
approve them.
Okay. Elisa, aye. Michael?
Aye.
David Courier?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Rosalind?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
And Judy's not part of our voting committee, so it passes unanimously. And so then, let's just do a motion to adjourn,
So moved.
okay? A second?
Second.
Okay, so roll call. Peter?
Yes.
Elisa, aye. Michael?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Stephen?
Aye.
Rosalind?
Yes.
John Osmond?
Aye.
All right, thank you.